Food waste is a huge problem in the United States. Did you know that 40% of the food in the United States is thrown away? Well, some of that is caused by factory farms, corporations, supermarkets, etc. Some of that is caused by you and me, consumers, individuals, and there are things that we can do to stop wasting food and throwing it away. So here is a list of 35 ways that I avoid throwing away food. Number 1 is I plan my meals in advance. This might sound like a really not exciting thing to do, that, I'm so organized that I will plan out my breakfast, lunch, and dinner for every single day of the week in my planner, but I do. I noticed that food was going bad sometimes. I noticed that it was contributing to food going to waste, and I wanted to stop that, so I started planning in advance everything that I was going to make for all of my meals. That doesn't always work super well if you want to be inspired by what you see at the grocery store, but once you are aware of what is in season when, you kind of have a general idea of the kinds of foods that you're going to see at the grocery store. And along with planning my meals in advance, I sometimes do a little meal prep. I don't always like leftovers, but if it's something like a casserole or a stew that tastes good leftover, of course, I'll make that whole thing at the start of the week, and then I can portion it out throughout the week. So if you're the kind of person who's inclined to let food go bad, to not finish eating something, meal prep it, portion it out into individual containers, and you're going to be less likely to waste it. So before I even go shopping or write my list, I plan out my meals, what I'm going to be eating that week, so I know what to buy. Number 2, if you are new to trying to not throw away food and you are just trying to take baby steps to get better and better, a good step that you can take is to plan your meals with the most non-perishable items in them as possible. What do I mean by this? Maybe plan more on the side of making spaghetti with sauce with canned tomatoes and dried pasta that can last in your pantry for months and months on end, rather than planning on making things like a fresh salad that uses a lettuce and cucumbers and tomatoes and a lot of other ingredients that can go bad very quickly. So rule number 3 that I abide by is I eat my most perishable items first in my grocery week, and I incorporate this into my meal planning. So what I mean by this is maybe the first day, like day 0, the day I go grocery shopping, or the second day after I go grocery shopping, those are the days that I'm going to eat my more fresh meals that need to be freshly prepared, aren't good leftover, and use ingredients that could go bad very quickly. So something like salmon with a fresh vegetable salad on the side. You want to eat that earlier in the week than later because fish doesn't last very long. Fresh vegetables like lettuce can sometimes wilt and go soggy pretty quickly. Whereas if I was going to make a chili, I might do that later in the week because things like beans and even ground beef, it can last a little bit longer in your fridge. Number 4, I make a shopping list. This might sound really basic and duh, of course make a shopping list, but a lot of people don't make a list, and then they'll just buy and buy and buy and buy and buy, and before they know it, they have twice as much stuff as they actually need. So make a list and actually stick to it. Rule number 5 is beware of sales and impulse buys. You have your list, you have your meals prepped, you know exactly what you need. Don't be distracted by that shiny avocado that's on sale, because if you don't have any plans for it, avocados can go bad on a dime, and if you didn't plan for it, you can have mushy avocado as a result, and you have to throw it away. And what good was that sale if you had to throw it away? You're basically wasting money, not saving money. Rule number 6 is always check the expiration date when you're buying something and after you've bought something, and be aware of general shelf life of things. Now, being aware of the general shelf life of things comes with experience, but you can totally look up a bunch of things on the internet. You can look up, how long does a steak last in your refrigerator? How long do carrots last in your refrigerator? How long do eggs last? But over time, if you're really paying attention, and if you track it on a calendar, if you really want to get really technical, you will come to realize over time about how long things are still good in your refrigerator. But I'm going to use milk as an example because it's something that frequently goes bad for Americans and they wind up tossing it down the sink. The expiration date on your milk, definitely check that when you're buying it. Sometimes they have milk where the sell-by date is the next day, and if you're not careful, you'll buy it and then you kind of have to drink it all up pretty quickly. Yes, milk is still good after the sell-by date, but I've bought milk that's barely good after the sell-by date, so you want to be really careful with milk. And even if the sell-by date is a lot later, let's say today's December 1st and the sell-by date is December 30th, if I open that milk on December 1st, it's not going to be good until December 30th. Once I've broken that seal, it's going to get bad much faster than it would have if I'd kept it sealed all that time. So be aware of things like that. Rule number 7, this goes with my meal planning, is have a plan in place for any items that you bought that are very highly perishable. So if you did impulse buy that avocado, if you did see, oh my gosh, like lettuce is so cheap and it looks so good, I'm gonna buy some and I'm gonna make a salad instead of this other thing that I decided I was gonna make sure that you make those things earlier on in your week. And what I like to do sometimes is I'll have like a special section of my refrigerator where I keep the highly perishable items so that I'll see them, and it needs to be like in the front of your fridge so you'll see them. Don't put your lettuce like in the back. 1, it could accidentally get frozen from the freezer, but 2, you can easily forget about it and then it can go rotten. But if you put it towards the front of the fridge and a very prominent part of the fridge where you're like, this is where I keep things that could go bad quickly, you're much more likely to use it before it goes bad. Rule number 8 that I abide by, and this is before I plan my meals, before I go shopping, I check to see what I already have. Like I check to see what's already in my fridge from the last time I went shopping. I check to see what's already in my freezer and pantry from the last times I've been shopping. And I see if there are some things in there that have been around for a while that I really should use, and try to plan my meals around those things first. And that leads into rule number 9. Shamelessly be that person that says, we already have food at home. You may have seen those memes, where there's the person who's like, we already have food at home. Be that person. If your partner, your children, your friends, whoever want to go out to eat, and there's a lot of food at home already, it's really wasteful to go out to eat when you have all this food at home. If going out to eat means that you don't eat the food at home and then that food goes bad, not only are you wasting money buying the food at the restaurant, but you're wasting the money by throwing away the food that you already had. It's this big domino effect. So be that person who says we already have food at home. Own it. Rule number 10 is physically write on some of your items, use by, and put the date. Or eat on Monday. And this especially goes with milk. I mentioned earlier that when you open the milk, the sell by date or the use by date on the milk is not necessarily reliable anymore. In my general experience, milk is good a week after you've opened it. Like, it's definitely good a week after you've opened it. It's usually good beyond that, but it's definitely good that first week. So if it's December 1st and you open that milk, say, drink me by December 8th. And then if December 8th rolls around and you haven't finished that milk, you have to do something about it. Rule number 11 is save your scraps. So just start noticing what you're throwing away that you're considering scraps that aren't really the edible parts of food. Just start noticing what you're throwing away. Sometimes those scraps really are scraps, but sometimes those scraps are actually food and you can be eating it. And you just have to get creative and use it in different ways. So for some specific ideas, rule number 12, and if you've seen any of my videos, you've probably seen me doing this, is make your own broth and stock. So what I do, I'm a meat eater, I'm an omnivore, so I have inevitably chicken bones left over after I've eaten chicken, sometimes pork bones, other bones. Save any bones that you have. And also, I cook a lot of food, so inevitably I have onion root tops, and I have that peel that's really fibrous outside the onion. That's not quite the skin, but it's not quite the onion, and you can't really eat it. Instead of throwing those things away, save them. Save your celery top bits that you can't eat either. Save them. And if you're not ready to make a broth yet, I freeze them. And once I have a nice collection of bones and carrot and onion and celery scraps, I boil those in water and I turn them into a broth. It's basically free chicken broth. You can do that with vegetable scraps too. If you're a vegetarian or if you want vegetable broth, just save your carrot, your parsnip, your celery, your onion, your leek, your scallion. Some herbs sometimes work. Tomato, bell pepper, save any of those vegetable scraps and you can throw them into your stock and make a vegetable stock. If you want, and here's a little pro tip, if you want the broths and stocks to take up less space in your freezer, you can condense them. So just boil them until most of the water evaporates and you're left with a half a cup of broth from what used to be 4 cups of broth. And then it'll just take up less space in your freezer. Tip number 13, potato skins. I don't like this personally, so I don't do it. I know I'm a bad person. I throw away potato skins. That's the one thing that I throw away because I just don't like russet potato skins. They taste like dirt. But if you like potato skins, if you like how they taste, if you don't mind that they taste like dirt, save the potato skins, toss them in oil and salt and bake them off in the oven, and they make a nice little crispy potato chip thing if you don't mind potato chips that taste like dirt. Number 14, and this is a biggie, my husband gets kind of annoyed by this, but I save my fat. After I've roasted some chicken, there's chicken fat left over after I've cooked bacon. There's bacon fat left over. If you cook a duck, you definitely save duck fat. It is a crime to throw away duck fat. Any fat though, like from making burgers, I save the beef fat, and I have separate little mugs in the fridge, and each one of them has a different kind of fat. And use those fats in cooking instead of oil. Yeah, oil's pretty cheap, but you know, if you're using fat that would ordinarily be thrown away, like you're saving that much more money, and it's full of flavor, so it gives your dishes some extra oomph. Number 15, and I started doing this a couple years ago once I learned how, candy your citrus peels. Candied lemon peel, candied orange peel, candied grapefruit peel. They're really tasty. You just boil them in a sugar water solution down, and then once they've candied, you roll them in some sugar. You can dip them in melted chocolate, and they make a really like elegant looking candy. You can give that away as gifts if you want, or you can just eat it. Really good stuff. And you can also candy leftover ginger too. Number 16, save your poaching liquids. This doesn't happen too frequently, but like if you make poached fish, you can save that poaching liquid, boil it down, and it'll make a nice little amount of a fish stock that you might want to use for a later recipe. Poached pears, I always save the poaching liquid when I make poached pears. If you boil that down, it makes a wonderful pear flavored syrup for pancakes. Or you can use it to boil pasta. Like if you poached the fish, you can use that water to boil pasta, and it'll give it a very nice, delicate, like light fishy sort of flavor to it. At the very least, you're saving water. Number 17, save those stale bread crusts and slices of bread and those end pieces that you typically don't want to eat. Save those. If you're not ready to use them yet, you can freeze them. Bread freezes really well, and turn those into breadcrumbs. They make really good free breadcrumbs. I never buy breadcrumbs. Number 18 is learn how to turn your leftovers into different dishes. So it can get really boring, like you make one thing and then you eat the same thing leftover 6 days in a row. You can get creative and learn how to turn your leftovers into different things. Like leftover steak, for example, that's just gross, like reheating a steak that's cooked to perfection. So slice it really thinly and put it in a salad the next day. Slice it really thinly and make a Philly cheesesteak sandwich out of it. Put your leftover cooked chicken into a curry or a stew or a pot pie. Turn your leftover mashed potatoes into gnocchi or bread or crust for a shepherd's pie. Turn your leftover risotto into deep fried risotto balls. They're delicious. Turn your leftover stale bread into bread pudding. There's lots of ways that you can reinvent dishes into new ones and keep things interested. Number 19, and this is like the one thing I haven't gotten into yet, but mostly just because I haven't needed to, because it's just me and my husband. Like I think if I had a big family and we didn't have as much space, I might be able to use this more, but canning. Like these are basically things that people did in the olden days before there were like grocery stores everywhere, before there was like refrigeration and freezing everywhere, but like people have been preserving their foods like for centuries. And a lot of like we've forgotten as modern people that these things are possible for us to do, and we've also forgotten how to do it. But yeah, canning, like especially if you're a gardener, you have an overabundance of tomatoes or anything, like definitely can that. Number 20, pickling. This is something I got into about 6 years ago. It's so easy and it's so much fun, and you can get creative and pickle all kinds of vegetables. Number 21, jam. So if you have an overabundance of fruit, a great thing you can do with it is make jam. And again, you can get super creative. You can mix fruits together. You can add any kind of spices you think might be interesting. And jam is pretty easy to make. You just puree the fruit, boil it down, add a bunch of sugar, and just cook it for a while until it's jam. I mean, you can get more technical than that, but that's the basic easy way to make jam. And while fresh fruit lasts maybe only like 2-3 days, jam will last 2 to 3 months in your fridge. Here's another one that I don't do so much. I only have done it really for herbs, but dehydrate. You can dehydrate some of your food. And like I said, herbs, that's the main thing that you can do that with. But if you get yourself like an actual food dehydrator, you can dehydrate your fruit and vegetables and make little healthy snacks. It's another really good way to preserve food. Number 23, this is something that I did do when I lived in a house, but I can't do it now so easily. That's composting. So at the very least, if you're going to be throwing away your food, it's better that it be turned into very fertile soil in which more food can be grown instead of just thrown away into landfills. So if you live in a house, totally be composting. If you don't live in a house, some people are lucky enough to live in a city that has a composting program, so do that. And I've also heard from some zero waste fanatics that you can like freeze your scraps that you would ordinarily put into a compost, and then you can take those to a farmer's market, and some farmers will take your scraps and then they will compost them and turn them into good soil to grow their veggies. Another thing you can do is freeze things. So this is the most obvious and the easiest, and most people, I'd say, do freeze some things. But chances are there are so many other things that you could be freezing that you're not freezing right now. But make sure that you keep track of what is in the freezer. Otherwise, things can sit around there for years sometimes, and they'll go bad after a while. So I actually have a document on my computer. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I'm sure there are apps you can use that will track this, but I have a document on my computer where I write down everything that's in the freezer. And I do it just kind of in order with like the newest items at the bottom, so I know that if something's at the top, it's been there the longest and it needs attention. But yeah, I just write down everything that I have in the freezer so that I'll know what's in there, because it's kind of easy to forget what's in there. And then if you're like me and you recycle yogurt containers and stuff, you don't necessarily know what's in what, so I can write down in my document that the turkey broth is in the ricotta container and the chicken broth is in the yogurt container, and you have a better idea. My grandma had like a deep freeze, and she'd have stuff in there that was in there for who knows how long, and she'd try to cook it for us, and her taste buds weren't as strong as ours were at that point, and like she couldn't really taste that. It tasted kind of gross and like freezer, but we could. So keep track of what's in there and for how long it's in there, and you can up your freezer game. And the golden rule of freezing is basically if it's something that you could cook, you can freeze it. So what I mean by that is lettuce. You're not going to cook that, so freezing lettuce doesn't exactly work. You freeze the lettuce, you defrost it, it's all mushy and disgusting, and you don't want to put that in a salad. Cucumber is another example of something. Avocado. You don't really want to freeze those. I know some people do cook avocados. I don't like cooked avocado. I think it's gross. I'm not a fan of cooked cucumber either. But if anything that you would cook, raw meat, cooked meat, milk, cheese, fruit, bread, butter, onions, carrots, broccoli, cookie dough, anything that you could cook or that you could buy in the frozen section of a grocery store, you can totally freeze. Of course, there are some limitations, like if you freeze broccoli and then defrost it, you basically have to cook with it. You can't then eat it raw. If you freeze tofu, for example, the texture gets all weird. Actually, a lot of vegans like that because it sort of has a meat-like texture once you've defrosted it. If you freeze cheese, it's kind of crumbly after you defrost it, but you can still totally use it. You can melt it into quesadillas, you can melt it into enchiladas, whatever. Milk, frozen milk, I found it has a tendency to curdle sometimes. So what I usually do with my frozen milk, and I freeze milk a lot because like I can't finish necessarily a whole gallon in the time before it goes bad. I turn it into Indian cheese, paneer, which is a really easy process. You just boil it and add vinegar and then curds form, and then you strain it and you press it together and you got cheese. Ricotta, same process, but you don't even have to press it. Make paneer, make ricotta, or I put it in mac and cheese, which, you know, that has cheese anyway, so it's okay if your milk curdles. So yeah, like I can't necessarily thaw out the milk and just drink it straight. It kind of tastes gross if you do that, but you can use it in baking. You can use it, like I said, to make cheese. But yeah, expand your horizons and think bigger. If you're gonna cook with it later, even herbs. I froze some cilantro recently, and yeah, it was all wilted and gross when I defrosted it, and I wouldn't wanna chop it raw and put it on top of a taco. But I chopped it up and put it into the enchilada mix when we made enchiladas recently, and I cooked it, so it was fine that it was previously frozen. Tip number 27, and this is something that I think a lot of Americans already do, but it's worth mentioning, and that is freeze complete meals in individual containers, so that in the future, if it's a rainy day, literally or figuratively, and you need a quick meal, you can just pull it out of the freezer and eat it. Just be careful to keep track of how long you have those meals in the freezer so they don't go bad. And also, if you notice that you consistently, like every time you make lasagna, every time you make stew, if you're noticing consistently that like you always wind up throwing away 2 or 3 servings, just preemptively freeze 2 or 3 servings of it, because you know that it's probably going to go bad otherwise. Rule number 28 is if you mess up cooking something, try to salvage it somehow. There are some tricks of the trade. If you oversalt something, you can add water, or what I like to do if I oversalt a sauce or a soup, I just make more of the soup or the sauce without any salt at all, and then I mix them together until I have the right consistency. If it's too spicy, too salty, too sugary, I did that with a pizza sauce recently. I added too much sugar, so I made a second batch of sauce with no sugar at all, and I added it, and it canceled canceled it out. If you scorch the bottom of a pot of stew, like very carefully pour the top part of the stew off and discard just the bottom part that was scorched. If you overcook meat, slice it really thinly, cover it with a lot of sauce, or you can kind of go the opposite route and you can like add it to a stew and cook the snot out of it, and then it won't really be overcooked anymore. It'll be like overcooked in a proper way. Overbaked cake can be rescued as well. You can either soak it with a syrup and make like a rum cake or tres leches sort of cake with it, or what I recently have discovered I really like doing is you mix it with a bunch of frosting, you scrunch it up in your hands, mix it with a bunch of frosting, roll it into balls, dip it in melted chocolate, and you got cake pops. Those actually freeze really super well too. So rule number 33, and this is something that I have a really hard time getting my husband to do, but just suck it up and eat it. I don't care if it doesn't taste the best. I don't care if you're tired of eating, this is your 4th day eating burritos in a row. I don't care. Suck it up and eat it. Number 34, and this is something that I exercise a lot with sweets because I love baking sweets, but I don't have much of a sweet tooth and neither does my husband. And usually when you bake something, you have to bake like a large batch of it and it's just 2 of us. So give food away. If you have extra food, if you know you're not going to be able to finish the whole casserole, if you know you're not going to be able to finish the whole pizza and you don't want to freeze it, you don't have room for it, or if it's something that you just don't think will be good, frozen and defrosted, give some of it away. So like I said, I do this with baked goods a lot. I'll bake, 3 dozen cookies and I'll preemptively just give away 2 dozen of them. I'll take them to Comedy Sports. I'll have my husband take them to his Pathfinder gaming group. We just give them away to people. This was a lot easier back when we lived in California where all of our friends were. Like, we don't have as many friends up here now, but yeah, if you have any group that you go to, churches are great for this, any kind of book club, anywhere you go where you meet up with a bunch of people, just bring the food, bring the baked good, and just preemptively give some of it away. And the last item that I want to say is just analyze yourself and get really introspective. Like, notice your patterns, notice your habits, notice, okay, every time I buy lettuce thinking that I'm going to be a good person and make and eat a salad, I never do, and I just throw away that lettuce. I've seen that meme. So if you're that person, don't buy lettuce, just acknowledge you're not that kind of person who eats salad. If you're like me and you find consistently that like you have this half gallon of milk in the fridge that like just you can't drink on time, acknowledge that you just have to be extra vigilant about your milk and have a plan in place for what to do with the rest of it. I pretty much like at this point now, which is great for me and my husband because we love Indian food and palak paneer is like one of our favorite Indian dishes. I basically just resign myself to freeze half of my milk up front, and then once I've saved up like a half gallon to a gallon, I just make paneer, and then I just make an Indian dish with paneer, and it works out super well because we like it anyway. But yeah, work with your habits, work with who you are as a person to do what you can to stop throwing away food. Thanks for watching. A lot of you guys who watch my videos are yourselves thrifty and food savers, and I'm sure there's things that I didn't mention in this video, so if you have any other tips on how to stop throwing away food, go ahead and leave them in the comments so that other people can learn as well. And I'll see you guys next Friday with kind of an experimental video. I'm going to attempt to make a really, really fancy French cake that we had in Quebec, and we'll see how that turned out.